Please, Mr. Lundgren, welcome to our webinar.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me.
It's a delight to have you here. So I wanted to start by just reflecting on some of the things that went on during 2020. If I think saying it was a difficult year is something of an understatement. Looking back now, do you think the decision to ground the fleet in March was the right one to take?
Oh, absolutely. And actually, you said in the intro there that it was 6 weeks. It was actually longer than that. It was close to 11 weeks that the fleet was grounded. And without the shadow of a doubt, this was the toughest decisions we've taken. It's almost surreal. Think about you have well over 300 aircraft that is flying and operating. And I remember telling my board in the earlier part of the year, something like in January, to say that, look, I think we're in for a record year, an all-time high year in the company's history. And then you went into this situation. But of course, there has been symptomatic about so many things throughout this pandemic that there's been so many things that's been sitting outside our control, that we just have been forced to adapt ourselves to that. And the grounding of the fleet was an example of doing that. And it's a tremendous logistical operation that I don't think a lot of people consider and reflect upon, to take that hold of the schedule, and then in a safe way basically shutting down the operation in the way that we did, and then coming on to where we are right now, then setting ourselves up to be able to ramp up. So we took the decision quite early on in the pandemic, because we said, and we were right on that we don't know for how long this is going to go on. So we need to make sure we do what we can to control the cash burn, as an example, get access to liquidity, and then also be able to ramp up in a safe way as quickly as we can, and to be nimble and flexible. And that's what we're seeing the result of this summer.
That's fantastic. I know you said at one point that you were ready to fly 90% of the fleet this summer, that it's ready to go if the demand is there. So we'll come on to this summer in a minute. But looking back at last March, that 11-week grounding, it must have generated an incredible number of refund requests. How did you guys manage that?
Well, this was a massive challenge, not only for ourselves, but also for the whole of the industry. And I think that's well documented. I mean, the number of cancellations we had was something that was completely, unheard of. I mean, we would have done in a month previously, perhaps making, 20, 30 cancellations in a month. And suddenly we were up to, hundreds of thousands of cancellations taking place. And I think that, we weren't prepared for that. There was no airline who could be prepared and set itself up for the way that you could handle the inflow that we had on cancellations. And that was a big challenge for us, and it caused a lot of frustrations for many of our customers. And we decided early on that we were going to give out the refunds in cash to as quick as we could. In some cases, we weren't able to do that because of the sheer volume. And remind you also that the people at that time and our customers didn't have the opportunity to self-serve the administrative requests that they were made for cash refunds. So there were many cases directed towards our contact centers, and the contact centers we have were in mainly in South Africa and India. And of course they were exposed to the pandemic, and they had to shut down. So it was really a difficult period for our customers. And but I'm also the organization worked tremendously hard to try to mitigate as much as we could of that. And since then we have digitalized much of that experience, and make sure that people can self-serve to a higher degree. And this is an important thing, because I said it on an occasion here earlier in the week, that in many ways, easyJet is coming out of this pandemic operationally a stronger and better airline. We have been investing into these things in order to make, for instance, the journey even more digitalized, and empower the customer to be in charge more of their reservations and their booking experience. And this is an example of that. But we have paid out over £1 billion in cash refunds. I don't think you're going to find any other airline who's been doing that, together with also other options. But we've been trying to have as generous policies we possibly can in order to meet the demand and the request that unfortunately has been the result of the restrictions being in place.
That's incredible. £1 billion worth of refunds. That's a lot. And it must have been a mammoth task. But it's interesting that you say digitization has come forward. And, I think that's something that a lot of airlines have realized, as we have at home, that the digital world is what we need to kind of get things going. So, in terms of the rest of your 2020, you kind of came back and there was quite a positive looking summer. But then, of course, more restrictions came in, and then the UK went into another lockdown. How did you manage all these changes? It was a bit of a roller coaster, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was a massive roller coaster, and I think it's the challenge is almost twofold, because on one hand you have the operational challenges that we all had to experience, and I think that the key thing about this was that you had flexibility in the way that you decided to, opening up and do flying, and then when restrictions were in place, that you then, had to scale back down again. But once again, it was a decision we took to say that, look, this is going to last for some time, and we have to be very, very flexible and nimble and agile in how we were doing it. Once again, this is another example. I mentioned one example about, how we were digitalizing more the process, that people could be more empowered to deal with the reservation. But one thing we also been doing, better than any other airline that is out there, we got proof of it this summer, is the ability to ramp up capacity quickly. So, we have added more routes than, any other low-cost well, we added more routes than the two competitors, the low-cost carriers together since June.
Wow.
We've added, hundreds of thousands of capacity in seats when, the green list was introduced as well. And we did that in a matter of hours. These were processes that usually took 7-8 weeks before. So that's because we changed the procedures, we changed the way we've been, handling the process around this as well. And the teams has done an amazing job in being agile. And this is going to be helpful also for us coming forward. So if you take the Q3 that we just had gone by, and we were flying, 17% of 2019 capacity. And I come on to talk, I'm sure, a little bit more about this summer, but we scaled that up now to the point that you mentioned, that we could actually do up to 90% of the available fleet. And to do that, and to make that happen while that the flying you are adding on is also generating a positive contribution to the company, was something we couldn't do beforehand. And as far as I can tell, there's nobody's of our competitors who's done anywhere close to the accuracy we've been having on putting on capacity that we actually eventually are also flying, that generates a positive contribution.
That's fantastic. I think there's been some very different strategies amongst the low costs in Europe. We've seen some that are keen to go anywhere that they see a lack of competition, while there are others that are really targeting it where there's demand. And I think you fall into that latter camp, and that's probably a wise business decision. So I wanted to talk a little bit about your bases. We did see some trimming and base closures, not just in the UK, but in wider Europe as well. How did you decide which bases were going and which ones were going to be the focus? And in particular, I'm interested to find out why we're seeing you more at primary airports rather than the cheaper ones, for example, Gatwick over Stansted or Southend. Can you just give us some colour on that?
Well, I'll start with the last part of the question. So this has always been at the core of the easyJet strategy. If you're gonna, really push, the essence of what easyJet is, and you had some of it actually into the introduction, that easyJet was built on the foundation to democratize travel as part of deregulation. We wanted, and it was set up, and the founder set it up as a way to say that, look, it can't be right that this experience should only be there for rich and wealthy and privileged people. So as part of deregulation, we started to offer flights that wouldn't cost more than a pair of jeans. And by the way, jeans cost way more now than actually a ticket with EasyJet. So from a customer's perspective, we really kept on to our promise on that. But the other part of the core of the strategy was actually to fly at primary airports and have
Okay.
leading positions at primary airports. Our model works the best when we have, and we are number one or number two in the primary airports. We're not interested to fly to airports you can't pronounce. We're not interested to fly into places where actually there's nothing there apart from an airstrip on the field somewhere. That's just not what we do. We fly into where people live. There are 300 million people across Europe who lives within 1 hour's drive from an easyJet airport. That's a lot. So
Mm.
that's what we decided early on, that that's where our focus is going to be. And strategy is very much about you make a choice. And we decided that the choice was going to be at this airport. Why? Well, a couple of reasons. One, we saw that there was a lot of inefficient legacy carriers operating at these airports, highly costly, and also easy to compete with. And a number of these airports was also slot constrained. So as an early part of what the company wanted to do was to come in here and build positions in here, because it's slot constrained airports, and if you're building strong position, you have a fantastic way of competing with inefficient airlines, and make very good returns on that, and grow as a company. And there were enough of these airports around that we thought that we could really make an impact on. So one of the things that's important to note about the success of easyJet, and why this is so good for us in the future, is that these positions that we have at the primary airport, they have been built up over a period of 25 years. So it's not only slots that you could find available today. If there was a new entrant into some of these airport, there were midday slots or 3 o'clock slots or 4 o'clock slots, but they couldn't get into the the highly in demand and the profitable morning slots and the late evening slot. That has been built up over a number of years. And when we have these positions and we are at scale, we get efficiencies. When we do a lot of frequencies, our cost base, our unit cost goes down. We get a wide presence and awareness in the markets where we operate. So actually the cost of the acquisition of the customer also falls, quite dramatically. So that's where the model works. And this outweighs the disadvantage that these primary airports are also more expensive than some of these airfields that you can't pronounce, to put it that way. So we have a great opportunity to still to build on that. And sometimes I get asked the question, well, would you consider doing long haul? Well, the answer is no. We're the second largest airline in Europe, but we still only have a market share about 10%. We got
Mm.
plenty of places we can still go on to. And I just to finish off here, because it isn't important, because it's really the core of what easyJet is from a strategic point of view, is that for us, when there are slots available, well, you can take Gatwick as an example. We've taken on slots since Thomas Cook, and also part of the development with Norwegian, and we improved that from 66 aircraft to 71 airport. Well, if somebody comes in and does an operation worth of 4 or 5 aircrafts, it doesn't make a dent into the environment in those airports, but we can do it because we already have that space. So that's what we're going to continue to look at, to gradually take these positions that now becomes available, because the majority of our competition is still against the legacy carriers who are retrenching. So that's why this is a fantastic opportunity for us as we come out of this, very much also with a transformed cost base, and still with the trademark of our amazing people as well. So we are very positive and confident about the future.
Very interesting. Thank you for that. You mentioned the slots. Now, of course, the slot waiver is still in place, but there are discussions ongoing about potentially bringing back something like a 60% operating minimum over the winter. Do you feel like it's the right time to alleviate that slot waiver, or does it need to remain in place for a bit longer?
I think it should remain in place, because what happens otherwise, and I think that particularly from a sustainability point of view, you're going to have operators that will in that case be forced to fly with half empty planes. And I think that just is socially irresponsible, when one of the biggest challenges that we are facing and questions that is on the table is on how the sector is going to reduce the impact on the aviation. So putting rules in place, whilst you have all the disruptions and the restrictions that exist because of the health and safety reasons related to the COVID, that you would need and be forced to fly them to protect your slots in that environment, I think that is just socially irresponsible. And anybody who argues the different to say that this is hampering competition, that's nonsense. Absolute nonsense. We're all handing back our slots. You're welcome to fly as much as you want to. So it's a choice you make. But I think that from a social responsible point of view, I think the slot way should be in place before we get stability
Mhm.
around this. There's no evidence that this hampers competition at all.
Great. And, some people see slot waivers as a form of state aid, but in terms of the actual bailout, easyJet did get some money from the UK's relief fund, not a lot, but it was kind of a drop in the ocean compared to the size of some of the bailouts we saw over the rest of Europe. Do you think this has created an unlevel playing field going forward?
I think it can, and I think to some degree it has. The question is how these funds will be used by these airlines and by these carriers. So look, let's do the numbers on easyJet first, because I think it's important to be a little bit more specific about that. We had furlough,
Hmm.
across the network as well. We had that in of course in UK. That's been something that's been available across whole Europe for a wide variety of business. We also had a loan from the CCFF, which was a not a company specific, not even an aviation specific loan facility. That was something that was available for UK company who was rated as investment grade. So you needed to have a certain rating on your balance sheet, and we have a strong rating, and we are still an investment grade company. So that was available for us as a loan. Then we also had a loan from what is called UK Export Financing, which is actually not a loan that's been given out by the government. There's no cash that goes from the government on this. This is a syndicate of banks who are borrowing it, and what the UK government is doing is that they're underwriting, guaranteeing this, but they also in return are taking assets that we have as security. So no liability, no risk for the taxpayer, and no cash coming out from the UK government on this whole thing. So you take that into consideration, you put that in the context of Air France KLM, what, 12 billion euros? Lufthansa's 10, 11 billion euros
Yeah.
as such. And the issue is, of course, that once you have the scales and the magnitudes of these things that are very, very different, but of course, and you also have Alitalia, which you well, let's not go there, but it's not a new phenomenon that this has been supported. All these airlines that I talked about has been supported one way or the other. We feel in a way that it's not, sometimes has been fair. They've been been having privileged treatments in many cases. So it's not something that is new, but the moment we start seeing that these funds are being made available to compete and take share in a way that distorts the market, we will be on to the commission about this, because this is highly, highly unfair, and ultimately it's going to hurt the consumers. So the we are watching this as well. At the same time, I have not been against state aid as such. I believe that this has gone over and above what you can expect the industry to deal with, and because our industry and sector is a vital part of the infrastructure for many countries, it has to be around, it has to be supported. So I think I have more criticism actually that there hasn't been specific aviation support from the UK government in order to support that, but it doesn't match at all the levels and the sums that you've seen that other airlines have got in Europe. And at the same time, you want to deal with this on your own merits. You want to deal and manage this, and that's what I think we have been doing. But there's not a single airline out there. There's not a single airline out there that hasn't received some support one way or the other in the shape of a furlough. So, you have to take a balanced view of this. But I think it's the scale and the fact that these funds aren't accessible and there for everyone that is the
Mhm.
concerning part of this.
Yeah, I think it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out in the longer term future. But enough
Well,
about
well,
last
well
year.
sorry, can I
Go,
just
carry
say,
on.
you mentioned a good point. This is the thing. How will this play out in the longer term future? Because
Mm.
there's no historical evidence that the financial performance of these airlines that I have mentioned can ever repay this. So So, either that makes up for a very healthy competitive marketplace for people such as ourselves to be able to compete on that, because the interest rates to serve these debts are going to be huge, and
Yeah.
that will have an impact on the pricing environment where we're operating. Or will it be the case that one sunny day when we look the other way around, some of these debts will be written off because the governments are also owners of these airlines? Who knows? But we will keep a very close eye on it.
Definitely. Watch this space, as my colleague likes to say on our podcast every week. So, moving on to this year, how is the rest of the summer looking? You know, where are you at in terms of your recovery and restoring the network that you had a couple of years ago?
Yes. So what I mentioned earlier, Sal, we have been, ramping up and introduced a huge number of routes and flights and capacity from the Q3. So the guidance we have given now is that for our Q4, which is July, August, September, we're looking to be up to 60% of 2019 flying. And this is all down and based on one core principle, and that is that every line of flight that we're adding on, that we're putting on sale should generate a positive contribution to our flying. And it was interesting now in the last week or so, ourselves and our low cost competitors have all come out with their results for the quarter, and we were the only one of those two airlines where the losses actually were reduced. The
Mm,
operating losses out of the two other ones were increasing. And that's just another testament to the fact that we got this right. We know our principle is working, but we also have the opportunity to scale up. There's no point that some of these airlines are boasting about, oh, I'm going to be up to that level of capacity, that level of capacity. Well, if you do that, your losses increases, and
yeah.
that's not a great thing, is it? Well, we're not back to where we want to be. So what we wanted to do is to make sure that actually we are gradually making sure that we are improving our results, and at the same time we have the ability to ramp up very, very quickly once that demand is there. But we will only serve the demand that is there, that generates the return that we should have, and there's plenty of that will come.
Fantastic. What sort of load factors are you seeing on your flights right now?
Well, we haven't disclosed that, but in June, as an example, we were up to 72% of load factor. So that shows you that this is coming up. But load factor is it's one part of the mix. It's not for us a goal in itself. The important thing is to look at the yield and the combination of the load factor to ultimately say, is this line of flying generating a positive, contribution to the company from a cash perspective, from a profit point of view? That's where it makes sense, and that's a combination of the yield and the load factor.
So we've had some good news this week that the UK is now open to double jab travellers from everywhere, basically. And of course, last week we had the green list, the amber list, no longer requiring quarantine. Things are starting to open up, but it's still very complicated, isn't it? How are you managing to kind of make these last minute adjustments and deal with the upset of the passengers when things happen?
Yes, it's very tricky, and it's a challenge. But you got to look at this. There's two sides to the stories. One is that you're seeing outside the UK, Europe is opening up. Europe has been on to this, much quicker than UK has, and it doesn't really make sense because UK, with the fantastic rollout and the success of the vaccination program, they should really have started to open up this much earlier, because they could have done that in a safe way without it jeopardizing the vaccination program or having any severe impact on the hospitalization. So they lost that opportunity to do so, and that momentum started in Europe much earlier. So we're seeing now that two-thirds, for instance, about the capacity that we are flying is taking place outside the UK. And in normal
Mm.
times, pre-pandemic, it would be around 50-50. So the bookings that are coming in now is coming in much more throughout, what is not the UK. And we have some places, Holland as an example, where we're back to 2019 levels with with the decent yield as well. So this is also a testament that it comes back very, very quickly. And I'm sure we're going to come on to talk about the future later, but what an evidence that people just can't wait to travel. And the whole
Yeah.
notion as well that will there be permanent damage to the industry? For instance, will business passenger flies less in the future? I don't believe so. Never thought so. You can look back at, I've been in too many crises, within this industry. But even going back to the Kuwait War and the 9/11 and the great financial crisis we had as well, that there were always people and commentators said, "Oh, life will never get back to it, and people won't fly." I mean, we're already back to 2019 flying, also from a business traveler point of view. So this will continue. And the difference is that the European governments in EU has been looking upon this to say we're going to open up international travel with the same lens, with the same approach as we're opening up the domestic economies, which means that it has to involve some bit of risk taken. There's nobody who can open up these things if you're assuming a zero COVID risk policy. But there's nobody who has that policy because you can't do that. You have to live with the virus and you have to do it in a manageable way. And what I think has been so great, that the European government's been doing, they have in many cases, said to their people to say that, look, this is what we believe, representing constitutes safe travel. So, for instance, Holland set out a case where they believe that, look, we can travel to freely from, with no restrictions, a country that has 150 cases of infections out of a population of 100,000. So people knew that, and they could track on a daily basis where different countries were. So those were the type of similar things that made people to have confidence in the system that they actually could book. So that has happened, and then of course they have allowed people to travel if they're double vaccinated without any restrictions at all. And what they then do, if they want to have testing in place, as an example, they use the much more available, much more affordable lateral flow test, which evidently is just as effective if you're looking at this, how you can track if you have the virus, if you do two tests versus one PCR test, as an example. And if you test positive, you can then move on to the genomic sequencing of a PCR test. None of that has been happening in the UK.
No.
It hasn't happened for various reasons, but which a lot of them I don't know, and I don't feel like speculating in either. But I can only tell that there's been a different lens and a different approach of looking at international travel. And what has been so disturbing is that there has almost been this view from some people in the government to say to the public that international travel is dangerous. Well, that's
Mm.
wrong. Depends on when you're traveling to and from. Most of Europe could have been on to that green list even as early here as in May, because the level of infections are lower there. And what matters really, if you're looking at the things that can cause a problem from a hospitalization point of view, are the levels of infection to where you're traveling from, or traveling from coming back into the UK, as an example, the level of vaccination rate in the UK, those three parameters, and the variants of concerns. And if you take those into consideration, you could put almost all of Europe now onto the green list.
Hmm.
And because the level of infections are higher, much higher in the UK than it is somewhere
Yeah.
else in the Europe, and also the variants of concerns, the beta variants, which would be, which they introduced, Amber Plus in France as an example, is it was 4% when they introduced this new category of Amber Plus, and is now down to 2.5% because the beta variants will fall away for the Delta variants, which is the predominant variant in the UK.
Mm.
So there's no scientific evidence why these restrictions are in place. So I think it has become political. And I think that haven't followed the framework, which means that customers doesn't have the confidence to make the reservation to the same extent. And also because the expensive and the unnecessary PCR testing is in place. Now, you're right. Good news when we see now that they're starting to recognize double vaccinated passengers from EU and US. Should have been done earlier, but it's good news that it's coming, and it shows you also the direction that we are on the road now to recovery. It's been a wasted opportunity not to do it earlier, but we're happy when it's here, and we've been setting ourselves up for that, and we're ready to ramp up the supply when it's going to come to us, which we're seeing that it's starting to do.
Fantastic. Do you think you'll still see a bump in demand from the UK in the summer, or is it just coming in too late? Have you missed that summer traffic now from the UK?
Well, I don't think we are writing off summer. We're seeing that it reacts tremendously, quickly on the sentiment and the demand. But of course, the longer it goes, into the summer before these restrictions are unwinded, the more people will make up their plans of what they're going to do.
Hmm.
So, of course, it would be much better if this would, and it could have been done in a safe way, introduced earlier. But you know what it means? It just means that the pent up demand just grows and grows and grows and grows. So when it's going to come back, it's going to come back in a way that, I don't think you and I or anyone on this call would never seen anything like it. And we know that, key driver on, why people got vaccinated. 47% of the people got vaccinated in the UK are saying that they got vaccinated because they wanted to travel. That's massive.
That
And
was definitely the driver for me.
yeah, and it's still the one thing that comes up on top of people's mind of what they want to do post pandemic is to go and travel over abroad on a holiday. So
Mm.
we will be surprised one day, very shortly, I believe, how quickly this is going to come back.
So are you expecting a bit of a winter exodus? Maybe people seeking winter sun destinations when things are even more unwound than they are now. Maybe that PCR test has been removed. How do you prepare for that in a season that's generally not as busy?
Yeah, so once again, it's different now when you're looking at outside the UK and in the UK. I think in the UK, they need to remove the PCR testing, and in the case because there's no evidence that they should have it in place. Also, the PCR testing that they're using for green and amber that they have introduced for genomic sequencing, they're only using it for 2% to do the sequencing on. So it's not being used either. So I think it's what people decision makers doesn't understand that this adds on a very very expensive cost to the journey that a lot of people say, look, it's out of reach for me. I can't do that. An average fare on an easyJet ticket return UK international is about 130 pounds average, and the PCR test on average is still 100 pounds. Well, you don't need to have a PhD in price elasticity to recognize that this is going to have a big impact. So key thing now is that they remove the PCR testing. And in the case they want to have something in place, they should do like everyone else is doing, have the lateral flow test. And in many cases also where government have said testing is necessary, they pay for it, and the government haven't done anything in terms of removing VAT. So that's the key core thing that now needs to happen. Whilst we can now see, and we would expect that many more countries now is going to need to come onto that green list finally. So directionally, you got to. Whilst one can be upset on a daily basis about these things, and it's important also to spell out and be clear about the evidence about these arguments. It is going in the right direction. That's the most important thing. Will we see that there will be a later summer, that people will book into September, October? I think that's the case. I think you're absolutely right. Sun destinations, for the winter, likely to see an upswing as well. And if we get stability on this whole thing as well, we might get very positively when it comes to the campaigns here turn of year for summer 22, which already started very positively.
Fantastic. So are your summer 2022 flights on sale now?
Yes. We opened it about record early, and we have it on sale now up until September 22.
And you're seeing some forward bookings in that
Yes,
sale?
yes, yeah. No,
Fantastic.
it looks good. Now the comparisons on a year-on-year basis is extraordinary because we didn't have it on sale last year to compare to, of course. But even so, if you compare it to you take the date when you have launched it earlier, and you're looking for that time period, it's very promising.
Fabulous. So I want to talk a little bit about your fleet, because prior to COVID, you had quite a solid fleet renewal strategy in place. You had A320neos, A321neos coming in. Everything's kind of gone on pause. When do you think you'll start taking deliveries again?
From next financial year. So it's coming up here in our financial year starts in October. So we plan to take on 8 deliveries here in next year, 7 deliveries the year afterwards. But here's the key thing to remember, and I put that in the context that there are a lot of competitors shouting about orders and aircrafts and so on as well. First of all, it's much better to make sure that you have the fleet that is adapted to the demand that is there, and that you do the flying that actually generates a positive contribution to the company. We have 101 aircrafts on order, and we have another rights and options of 78. So that's 179 aircraft that sits just within the relationship we have with Airbus. That is big. And we can
Mhm.
easily also, if we want to, and we find that it's the right thing to do, go over and above that to make sure that we always will have the supply that is there to meet the demand. And we are going to look at growth opportunities. But I thought it'd been pointless throughout this period where the whole of the industry has been in a mode of survival to talk about winning market share. Well, you can have as much as I concerned 100% of market share and lose the shirt off you. Go ahead. Please feel free. The most important thing that you're available to have this ready to deploy when you see that you got growth opportunities that deliver the return you want to have. and with the transformed cost base that we have and the flexibility in the fleet and the opportunities clearly to go outside that, we think we're in a very, very strong position.
Fantastic. So with the larger A321 Neo, what's the plan for this? It's a really popular aircraft for low-cost carriers in particular. Are you planning longer flights or, higher capacity flights? What's the plan for these?
No, it's really to deploy them into the routes that we have, that we can thicken, so to speak. Existing routes that we have, that we can, we already have the frequencies on as well, where there's slot constraints in the airport, as an example, where you can't add more flights on and more aircrafts on. You can actually deploy these larger aircraft and actually increase the capacities anyway. And when you're looking at our fleet plan, you also need to take into consideration that we are constantly upgauging also the fleet, the capacity that is available on the aircraft, because we are gradually shifting out the 319s into the 320 and the 321s, that apart from having an efficiency effect, which is positive, and from a sustainability is better because they're more efficient from a carbon emissions point of view, it also adds growth, with the same amount of aircraft that we have available, which is really good thing. So in to thicken up, the most popular routes that we have on slot constrained airports.
Fabulous. And the A321LR and even potentially the XLR, do you see a place in the fleet for these in the future?
No,
Just flat no.
no, because the reasons I just said to you, if we had this conversation and I said, look, I got 30% market share now and I got nowhere to grow, well,
Mm,
then it might be a different decision. And it's not entirely clear either that the low cost model works as efficiently, on longer routes and on long haul.
mm.
There's been admirable attempts by Norwegian, as an example, who I think had a really good product out there with the Dreamliners. But what happens is, of course, that the benefits you have of the efficiencies, actually reduces the longer the plane is in the air. You get most efficiencies, with the short turnaround times and on short haul. So the inefficiencies, kind of, that you have, you can hide them more the longer the flight really is. So, there might still be opportunities, but it's not for us, and not in the near future or midterm
Not
future
until
either.
you've reached saturation point, at least.
Yeah.
Fabulous. So I know you guys have done an incredible job of raising money through the pandemic as well to support your business. And some of that was done via sale and leaseback transactions. I know leases have been something of a lifeline for airlines, but this must have slightly unbalanced your owned versus leased fleet. I was just wondering if there was a plan to restore that balance in the future.
Well, first of all, we raised over £5.5 billion of liquidity. So, there was these three things we really put our mind on, very early in the pandemic. One, we set out, and here's the thing, if you don't know what's going to happen, you have to assume some principles. And one of the principles we had to say, look, we don't know for how long this is going to last. So you got to take a decision based on that, which means that, okay, if you know that that is the principle you're doing, well, what do you then need to do? Well, you need to make sure you have enough liquidity. So that's why we were very quick and decisive to raise that amount of fund. And what we then wanted to do was also to raise them through a wide variety of sources, so we can get competing offers on the terms that we took this on to. So liquidity has been, and it's an important part of what we've been doing. Second thing was also to manage the cash burn, to make sure that you had, as little cash leaving the company as possible. And that was done in conjunction with the largest cost program we ever done. We have reduced, 500 million of costs this year. And, half of that, we expect almost half of that will be sustainable going forward. And we keep working on that. And the cost base is transformed in easyJet coming out of this one. Secondly, was to adapt the fleet. We already talked about that, to have that flexibility in order to do that, and then make sure that you were able to scale up and ramp up. So when we did this whole thing about raising the liquidity, we went to a wide variety of sources, and because we came into this as one of the strongest airlines in Europe and actually in the world, if you're looking at it from a balance sheet point of view, the company has been, conservatively and fiscally, well run for many, many years. And that helped us coming into this. So we had the options to look at different types of financing that actually wasn't available to others. And if they were, they costed a lot more. So you see that from a number of sources we raised liquidity from. So that means that, one source of liquidity has come through the sale and leasebacks that we've been doing. And we had, ownership about 70% of the fleet previously. Our ownership still sits about 50, I think it's 51%, but 41% of the fleet we have is still unencumbered. There's no financial liability on those. So we have that option available still. But, we also have other options, and we're going to continue to review all the options that we have available to make sure that we will always have the right amount of liquidity that is needed. And because we have a range of choices of these sources, we can create the tension also to make sure we get the best terms out of that. But sale and leasebacks has been one part of it. And we have a very good reputation with the lessors because they know we take care of our aircraft and we have a great maintenance program of what we do. So we achieved, satisfactory pricing out of the transactions we've been doing.
Great to know. So I wanted to just ask a little bit about your routes and your network and how everything's shaping up. You guys had the honor of being the first airline to operate a scheduled departure from Berlin-Brandenburg. I understand it wasn't all that smooth because there was a bird strike, but let's gloss over that. What are your plans now you're not spread across two different Berlin airports? Is there going to be more activity from there?
Well, so one of the things we've been doing is actually then look to make sure that we are, adapting the overall fleet size now to a period where we're going to need to have more flexibility and adapt ourselves ultimately to, what is in the short term a lower level of demand. So we have reduced our operations in Berlin, but since it's now been focused on one airport, we're getting much more efficiencies in operating from one airport rather than two airports. And actually, the Berlin operation is doing really well. It's been, a tremendous success opening up a lot of leisure routes internationally that wasn't there before. And we're very pleased to see that this has been a, base with two quite difficult airports to operate with a lot of capacity on. That made us, and we still are in that camp of being, the leading airline in Berlin, and we continue to do so. But it's much easier and more efficient to operate from the new airport.
And it looks like a great airport. I haven't had a chance to check it out myself yet, but I'm looking forward to it.
It
Um,
is. It's been prepared for many years, as you know,
well,
to
yes,
open up.
it's
So
absolutely ready.
yeah, no, listen, the I think that the management at the airport and the relationship and the partnerships we have with the suppliers there has been, great, really constructive, and we're offering a great experience, much more improved experience for our customers from Brandenburg.
Good to know. So, Italy has been another really interesting market for easyJet, a very focused market for you guys. Are you concerned about the amount of capacity that your competitors are throwing at that market right now?
Well, I'm not concerned about any competitors. One should have respect for competitors, but concern is the wrong word. Look, we proven that we can compete with anyone. In a number of cases, if you look through in details, you would see that when we are seeing increased competition from some of the competitor low cost carriers, we can improve our product, increase frequencies, and meet up on price. And in many cases, they retrench, they pull back, they cancel. So, and that's been the history. It's just that we don't send out a press release about it every time it happens. Look, we can compete with, efficient airlines, we can compete with inefficient airlines. And, Italy is a good example where actually that has happened. So we welcome competition. And, ultimately, it's good for the customers and may the best, company win.
You've also been adding in new routes in the domestic UK scene, which was interesting to see. I'm presuming this is spurred by the kind of notion of maybe a staycation summer. Do you think all those will stay long term?
Well, it remains to be seen. It's a number of these routes are routes that are new to us that we have, been taken, that's been replaced in other, carriers, and it's better from a sustainability point of view because we're more efficient, and we also have our offsetting program, which means that we are offsetting fully the carbon emissions from the fuel we're using. So
Mm.
that remains to be seen. We will be there and have it available if the demand continues to be there. But look, there's no doubt that because of the restrictions that are in place from international travel, that there's, you know, a higher proportion of people who've been choosing to have their holidays spent in the UK. And I know a lot of them can't wait to, you know, travel overseas the next time. And we will, you know, monitor where the demand goes. And that's one of the great things of being an airline, that you actually have the ability to fly where people wants to fly.
Want to go,
Um,
yeah.
yeah, wants to go. And you know, we've had another example of the flexibility we have is that we have open seasonal bases. So we have, you know, bases that we only operate now in the summer in Malaga, in Faro in Portugal, and in Palma. And we had a number of routes that we intended to serve into UK from these bases, that because of the restrictions, unfortunately, we didn't do that. So we moved
Mm.
some of that into Scandinavia and Amsterdam, Berlin, as an example, with great success. So it gives us the flexibility to do. But look, where the demand is, where we can make a positive return on that, and when it comes back to having, you know, those leading position at these airports, then we will look to fulfill it.
Great. And it's interesting you mentioned the carbon offsetting there. I know you were one of the first, in fact, the first airline, I think, to start carbon offsetting all your flights. How much has been offset to date, and what's this cost? What's this sort of cost to easyJet to do that?
Well, we retired in 2020. I think it was 3.4 million carbon credits. So
Wow.
what we said at the start of the program was that, you know, we're looking to fly on a normalized basis in 2019. I think around 8.5 million carbon credits, and that would be a cost we guided to be in the area of 22 million, something like that. We haven't given any more specifics around that, but you can work out, you know, some of the numbers in there. And the reason why we can do that is because we're such a big investor into these projects. So we are not getting and buying this at retail price. We're doing big chunks of these things, investing straight into these projects, which is primarily projects on forestation, or, you know, preventing deforestation and avoiding degradation of forestry. You know, the forest, the issues around forestation or deforestation is the second largest contributor to climate change. So, you know, it definitely has an impact, and it's the highest quality of product that you can find. And they are independently verified that actually that, you know, the actions that we're taking to avoid carbon emissions being taking place, or they work as a sink tank to attract carbon emissions from the air, are verified that without our funds that wouldn't happen. And it's not also that there's a leakage, so carbon emission will be taking place elsewhere as a result of that. And we're enormously proud of this. You know, that basically means that, you know, every flight you are taking with easyJet, in contrast to any other airline in Europe, you know, on the whole network, is carbon neutral, period. That's just the way it is. This is not up for debate. I know there are some questions and concerns that people, you know, have on this from a moral point of view. Is it right that, you know, that you should pay for something while you emitting at the same time? Well, today it's the one technology that is available if you want to have a dramatically reduced impact on the environment. And
Mm.
we were the first one to launch this. We've had other airlines to follow us, Delta as an example, which is great. You know, all kudos to all the airlines who does that, but it's an interim solution. It's an interim solution before you get on to the zero emissions technology that, you know, will be here in the 2030s. Airbus has some promising projects. Wright Electric, which we're working with in the US, also have some, you know, great innovations taking place, and this will happen. This is not a question, you know, it's a question about when, and it's a question also how you transition to that. But we're enormously proud of the carbon offsetting scheme. It's the you know, highest quality products you can find, and it makes immense, you know, good impact on the environment, and also in many cases for on communities.
So, putting on your other hat as Airlines for Europe chairman, I know you've had a lot of involvement with the Destination 2050 project, which aims to decarbonise Europe's aviation sector. What can we realistically expect in the next sort of 10 to 15 years in terms of technology and sustainable aviation fuels?
Well, so first of all, this Destination 2050, it's actually, you know, something we all in Europe should be immensely proud of. This is the first time that a group of airlines in any continent on this planet has actually come together to commit itself to net zero by 2050. And this is not a document that was just made up, that that was written by the airlines. This has been, it's an academic research, thoroughly written paper that we presented. There still remains a lot of things to be happening in order for it to happen, but there's now a very clear plan on how we can get there. And that involves a number of things. One, it involves introduction of things like things that sits outside our control, introduction of the single European sky as an
Mm.
example, that we know that if that was introduced today, it would have at easyJet, just on our network, we would see a reduction of carbon emissions of 15%, 1 5,
Wow.
just on easyJet's network. And this is a political decision that can take place right now. So that needs to happen as an example. And just also the improvements of the air traffic control management that exists in general. There also is evolving new technology. And it's extraordinarily exciting when you're looking at that technology, whether that is hydrogen or electric or a combination of these things as well. The development in these areas are fascinating, and it's quite frankly a shame that the decision makers are so poorly read up on what the latest is in regards to these technological development. Because I remember when I joined easyJet, and the company had been on to this for quite some time. It wasn't my idea, but I feel very passionate about it myself. So when I started researching this and met up with companies all over the world on this, and starting doing panels and seminars, I could just tell that a lot of decision makers didn't know half of what was going on. And if you're looking at the development right now on batteries, and if you're looking at the development also on hydrogen and the combination of it, it's extraordinarily promising. Nobody's now arguing whether this is going to happen or not. Electric flying is taking place as we speak. There are a number of electric airplanes around, small planes, but to scale that up, that is now feasible to see within the next 10 to 15 years. So then it's about how do you transition to that. How does each jet, with a fleet of, well, we're well over 300 now, and we're going to be even larger going forward. How do you make that transition into taking place? And do you do it on a per route basis? Do you look at this from a base point of view? And how can the governments encourage, and incentivize that transition to happen? So that's part of it. You have sustainable aviation fuel, as an example, which is definitely a solution for long haul. I don't believe at all that is something that will have a meaningful impact on short haul. Sustainable aviation fuels in itself has the same characteristics when in use as kerosene. It's actually the production methodology that means that it draws carbon, works as a carbon sink. But that it's the same as a carbon offsetting scheme, a high quality carbon offsetting scheme. So the notion that we need to have governments now investing a lot of subsidies in order to make that affordable, I think that could make sense, because it is one of the solutions that the long haul would need. But it's much more promising to focus on zero emission technology from an aircraft point of view. So you got that. Then it also needs to be a regulatory framework, a taxation framework around this that actually incentivizes companies to do this, to make this happen. There needs to be grants, there needs to be R&D, there needs to be something that actually not only penalizes companies but actually make it worthwhile to go into these type of technologies. And I realized there has to be sticks and carrots, and I can see that happening. But there's a framework now that sets this out. What we now need to do is go down more into a more detailed level to say at what points in time will we have achieved what, and what are the things that needs to happen here, with the whole of the sector, including also decision makers and politicians, to make sure that these frameworks are in place. It won't happen unless the support and the engagement is there from everyone in this industry, and also the people who affects this industry. But I am optimistic, because I think everybody has set itself up that this is something we will manage, and we will get to it. And when we do that, we know we can make it work.
I have to agree. I think there's some great work going on at Airlines for Europe and IATA as well, and hopefully this is something that will stay on the agenda until it gets resolved. It was our biggest challenge pre-COVID, and it's going to continue to be our biggest challenge post-COVID. So
Yeah.
looking into the future, um, When do you expect easyJet to be back at 2019 capacity? Have you got an outlook on that?
Well, what we said is that we said earlier 2023, but I also said, we discussed it internally at the team to say that, look, we can take 2022 or we can take 2024. The
Mm,
issue is that nobody knows. So when and anybody says that the claims that they know, that they're lying or they're just not ignorant. So what do you need to do? Come back to the principle we had. We didn't know for how long this was going to last, so you have to be
mm,
flexible. We have some cases, like I mentioned, Holland, back up to 2019 levels already right now, and we can support that with the fleet that we have. So the important thing is that you can ramp up capacity when the demand is there. It's all down to the restrictions, and the
mm,
restrictions are all down to the success of the vaccination programs. And when you're looking at the success of the vaccination programs, and also now the next generation of the vaccines that's going to be rolled out here in November and December, that also looking to be much more effective also against different variants of concerns, you're on the right track here. So,
mm.
if that happens, we might get positively surprised that this comes back earlier. And I think that we're definitely on the road to recovery, and then we're going to go into the growth phase again, and then we're going to look back at this pandemic and see what what happened, what happened, how did that happen?
What can we learn?
Yeah,
Definitely.
and something to tell the grandchildren about,
Oh,
or
yes,
not,
absolutely. I
or
keep
not,
telling my
or not,
children they're
not.
living through history here, but they're still
Yeah.
refusing to keep diaries. So who
Well, they don't
knows?
seem that excited about living through history, do they? They
No.
don't seem that enthusiastic about that.
I think they'd much rather not be. So, I mean, just to kind of close off, you said before about these higher levels of debt and how airlines are going to service that. I guess that gives the potential for fares to go up in the future. And I know one of your competitors even said that easyJet will struggle to be a low cost airline in the future. How would you respond to that?
Well, it's nonsense. It's
Okay.
quite frankly just nonsense. I mean, this is the thing, and this is what people are doing, and they make up things as they go along. We have, improved our cost position against the legacy carriers, even more, to the extent that we had disadvantages, and we have had disadvantage because we fly from different airports. We pay our people properly through union agreements on local terms, as an example. It's not everybody who does that, and that means that there's costs attached to that. But as far as I can tell now, that with the actions we've taken, nobody has taken more action to transform their cost base. So I'm ready to put that up against any nonsense challenge of people throwing out capacity that they're increasing their losses on. So you go ahead. Happy
Incredible.
to compete in a transformed environment and see what happens then.
Strong words, Mr.
Yeah, well,
Lundgren.
they
So,
might just be focused on reducing the losses instead of increasing them.
absolutely. Yeah, I can take your point there. So, looking ahead, let's forget this all happened. We're in the future, 10 years from now. What does easyJet look like? You said 10% market penetration now. Where are we going to be in the next decade?
I think we're going to be the leading airline in Europe, and we're going to have a great holidays business. We have an immense opportunities when it comes to holidays. The proposition why we set that out, that we had, in 2019, some 20 million customers who were booking hotels with us, but we only managed to capture 500,000 of those. With easyJet holidays that we set up, that's going to be a pan-European player, because it can build on, what is already the most advanced leisure, network in Europe. We get great prices, we get great cost, because it benefits from the airline's cost base, and it's set up in a dynamic way. So you can book much more flexible holidays that you can't get with the traditional tour operators, and you can do it with a cost base that is significantly lower, that delivers better value than if you book it with an OTA. So, that's a fantastic proposition, and we can roll it out, across other markets. So, we are, this is it's so many things to be excited of in these difficult times. But we can see the light at the end of the tunnel, and it's coming closer and closer.
That is a beautiful, positive sentiment to end today on. And I do apologise to everyone for going slightly over time, but Johan, I could talk to you all day. It's been wonderful. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much, and thanks everyone for listening in. Thank you for having me.
Brilliant. So thanks everyone for coming along today and for supporting our Future Flying webinars. As usual, if you can share your thoughts on social media using the hashtag Future Flying, we'd love to engage with you on your social platforms. Everybody who's registered will get a recording of today's session sent to them, and there is now also a function on the Simple Flying website to play back any of our past webinars you might have missed. So for now, have a great rest of the day, and please do visit simpleflying.com for more great aviation content. Thank you.